Hello.
Hi. Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
How are you, Ariel?
Good. How are you?
Good. I'm Allison. I'm one of the owners at Fabled.
Oh, nice to meet you. I
I
missed you the other day when I was there.
I was gonna say I was so sad to miss you. We had a goodbye lunch for someone who'd worked for us for a while. Otherwise, I would have been just rushing there to
Oh,
meet you and talk with you
thank you
because I
very much.
absolutely loved this book. I'm so excited to talk about it.
Thank you. Hello, Elizabeth.
Hello, my friend. How are you?
Good, good. I am home. I'm good.
Good.
Where do you live?
Nashville, Tennessee.
Oh,
Franklin,
nice.
actually. So just south of Nashville.
Y'all have had a lot of snow lately, right?
We did. My kids did not go back to school until today. So
Oh
last
my goodness.
Monday, I was gone. They got 10 inches and they have been shut down out of school ever since.
Crazy.
I
I'm a little
cannot
jealous.
imagine.
I was really jealous to miss it. I love a good snowstorm. I love a good snow day, and I missed it all. So,
How old are
We
your
just,
kids?
it just got cold here.
cold, yes. My kids, they are, I have to count, 20, 19, 16, and 15. The two older are in college and the two younger are in high school.
Okay. So they can entertain themselves for the most
Oh,
part.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's
That's
easy.
nice.
This stage of life is easy.
Yes.
Well, easier.
In some
Elizabeth
ways.
has walked ahead of me in this. I have a 16-year-old and a 13-year-old. And what I love is she says, little people, little problems, big people, big problems.
Yes, yes.
And
Yeah.
I agree. I think
And
that is,
you stay up late like you did when you had little babies.
Yeah,
It
but
turns
you're
out a bell
losing
curve.
sleep for a different reason.
Yeah.
Instead of like they're waking you up because they're not sleeping, it's,
right.
they're not
Yes.
home yet. Where are they? You're checking the phone.
Yeah.
Yes. The mental load feels more so like we were physically exhausted when they were young, but
Right. Because now they're out there, I mean, they're independent people doing things, making decisions that can last forever. It's just,
yeah.
it is so hard in a different way.
Yes, I agree. I feel like I'm getting hints of that. So I appreciate Elizabeth being having words of wisdom for me so I don't completely freak out
Yeah. But
sometimes.
the empty nesting makes it all worth it. It's nice
Oh,
to enjoy them and
yep.
then
Yes.
send them on their way.
Our last year, our pastor told us, he's like, you have to practice empty nesting. You have to practice it.
Oh,
And so we took that to heart and we are practicing.
Yeah.
that is very smart. That's very, very wise for sure.
Yeah.
I just realized I did not enable the chat, so I did. If anyone is here and would like to say hello and say where you're from, hello from Amarillo. I feel like we are still experiencing cold weather, which is been consistent for us. Usually we're like ups and downs all
Mhm.
the time in Texas. Like you leave the house, it's 30 degrees, you come back home, it's 70 degrees.
And a dress in layers, yes.
Yes, all the time. I never know what anybody's wearing. I don't even find them anymore. I'm like, take a jacket or not. I mean, I don't know. You might be fine.
Mine thankfully have grown out of the phase. All of my boys did this where it's January and they walk out in gym shorts and a
Yes.
t-shirt and they're like, I'm
Yes.
not cold, it's fine. And I'm
I
put a
know.
coat on.
I'm just like, okay, fine, bye. I mean, love and logic with that situation.
Bye. Yeah. See ya.
Yeah.
Anyways, well, it is 7 o'clock, so we will officially start. I am really, really been thrilled about this particular book club, and it's been a while since we've met. Like, I feel like I'm like long time no see, because last time we were doing a book review of like our favorite books of the year, and before that was our November book club. So it's been a while since we've been able to share a book with everybody, and we have such faithful people who come to book club. I love it. I feel like I recognize names and I know Elizabeth feels this way. Sometimes they will come in the shop and be like, I'm so and so. And I'm like, I recognize your name from the Zoom.
Oh,
And
that's
they're coming from out
fun.
of town too, which is so amazing. So I love it. And everyone's saying where they're from, Maine and Chicago and Wisconsin. I'm amazed. It's so amazing. So just a quick introduction. If this is anyone's first book club, we are here with Ariel, and we're so excited to talk about the Frozen River. I read it last year, so I was like, I'm considering it one of my favorite books of last year after reading all the books, and now I'm also considering it a favorite book of this year.
Yeah.
just because it was so great. And I hope you guys enjoyed it too. We will, if you have not read the book, I want to warn you that spoilers abound here. We are going to be talking about the beginning, the middle, the end. If you have not read it, I would say, don't worry. We will send out a recording tomorrow so you can come back and listen to it. But I know that sometimes it's nice for the author to feel like the freedom to like talk about everything and to discuss choices because,
Sure.
and sometimes it's just hard to give a summary and then, not to explain anything. And if you have any questions, feel free to put it in the chat and we'll try to get to it. Elizabeth and I have a lot of questions, but I will let her start with introducing our author.
All right, so tonight we are so fortunate to have Ariel Lawhon with us. Ariel is a critically acclaimed New York Times bestselling author of historical fiction. Her books have been translated into numerous languages and have been library reads, one book, one county. Is county, right? County and country. I always struggle with it. Just a little confession. Indie Next, Costco, Amazon Spotlight, and Book of the Month Club selections. She lives in the rolling hills outside of Nashville, Tennessee, with her husband and 4 sons. She splits her time between grocery stores and baseball fields, and we totally understand that. So welcome, Ariel. And as I told you, we were so fortunate to get to see you, I guess about a week and a half ago. And I told you I have read all of your books from Flight of Dreams on. I have not read your first one and I'm going to do it. And I've always loved your books. And I recently was talking to Anne Bogle and she said, you need to have Ariel for a chat because I just really feel like her books are very fabled friendly. And I agree. And it's exciting to finally be here.
Well, thank you so much for having me here and also for having me in the store. That was so much fun. I loved popping in. I had a friend with me and that made it even more fun. I am obsessed with your children's section still. I keep seeing the door into Narnia. But really, I'm grateful to be here. I love this part of the job.
Great. Well, can you just to kind of refresh some of our memories, tell us the basic synopsis of Frozen River?
Sure, of course. Frozen River. It is a story of a woman named Martha Ballard. She was a midwife in Maine in the late 1800s. The story takes place 1789 into 1790. Martha Ballard is remarkable for really 3 different reasons. The first is that she delivered over 1,000 babies in the course of her career, and she never lost a mother in childbirth, which I think is astonishing. I don't personally know an OBGYN today that can boast a record like that. The second thing that I think is incredible, she is the great aunt of Clara Barton, founder of the American Red Cross, and
Oh.
great-great-grandmother of Mary Hobart, who was one of the first female physicians in the United States. And like when you look at the medical legacy that she left in this country, it is almost unparalleled. But the reason this book exists is because Martha Ballard also kept a diary for 30 years at a time when many women could not read or write. And in that diary, she recorded every birth, every death, every murder and scandal that happened in her small town of Hallowell, Maine. Actually, I should have pulled it off the shelf. I have it right there. And it is the contents of that diary that inspired this novel.
That is so cool. I love it so much. I was given my great grandmother's diary from 1897.
Oh, wow.
And it's so fascinating. And she actually was so regular in writing that when the pandemic happened, I went to that year to see if she said anything. Only one entry said something about someone having the epidemic is what she said.
Oh, wow.
But I love it so much just because it's something near and dear to my heart is like learning about diaries and reading them. And I'd love to hear, because your books have been called biographical fiction rather than historical fiction or in addition to, can you define what that term means for us?
I don't know that there is an official definition. The way that I think of it is a novel written about a real person or event. So I am sticking closely to the historical facts. I've written about a judge in 1930s. I've written about the last flight of the Hindenburg. the Russian Revolution, World War II multiple times, and now about this midwife in Maine. All of these stories are true. All of them, I would say 70 to 90% of the events in the book really happened. Obviously, they are fiction. Usually conversations are not recorded. We don't often know what goes on behind closed doors. And so that is where the storytelling process kicks in. So it's whereas biography is just the facts and
Right.
nothing but the facts, ma'am. This is, I have more freedom to fill in a story.
So great.
We talked about this the other day that I do love historical fiction, but there's sort of this saccharine version of historical fiction that doesn't really appeal to me personally, but somehow your biographical fiction just really hits well for me. So
Thank you. I always want people, might sound terrible. I always want people to feel like I have my teeth right on their jugular the whole time. They're not certain if it's going to be okay. And then they finish the novel and they're like, oh, we made it. We made it. Everything
Yes.
is great. And that, I just want you to have that feeling that I've just taken you by the throat and you're not sure if you're going to make it out okay.
I'll never forget that. That's great. Well, tell us how you came across Martha's story. I love that. I've always described when I'm selling your books at the store, it's like she finds these obscure people that we sort of know a little bit about, but really shines a light on them. So tell us how you met Martha Ballard.
Course, this is actually one of my favorite stories. I was in the doctor's office. I was pregnant with our fourth son, and I was waiting for my doctor. And had he been on time that day, this novel would have never been written. But he was stuck at the hospital with a tricky delivery, so I got stranded in his waiting room. And I had two choices. I could go home and reschedule, but there were children waiting for me there, and I didn't currently miss them. Like I said, fourth boy. And my husband was there. My husband was watching the kids, so no one was going to die. It was all good. And I decided to stick it out. And I waited for hours. I finished the book I brought with me. It was Stardust by Neil Gaiman, which is fantastic. And then I read all the magazines in the office, and there was nothing left except a pile of scary pamphlets and the Our Daily Bread devotional at the bottom of the pamphlets. And so I opened that day, August 8th, 2008. And I read the story of a woman named Martha Ballard. I'd never heard of her before. And I remember thinking that would make a great story, a great novel. So I ripped the page out and I put it in my purse. And I kid you not, my doctor walked in about 2 minutes later. And it's so funny. I told that story and somebody got really mad about ripping the page out. And I'm like, oh, listen, there are these little things, they're little pamphlets. They're only 3 months long. They're meant to be thrown away at the end of the 3 months. It's fine. I did not desecrate a library book
If
or anything.
anything, you replaced it by writing a book about
Exactly.
it.
There we go. And I still have that little page. It's in a closet around that corner. And the funny thing is, I found this idea before I wrote any of my other novels. And I would just look at it and be like, oh, not time. I'm not ready yet. And I waited and I waited and I waited about 15 years. And I like to say now that I could not have written this book until my children broke me. But what I really mean by that is that Martha is a mature heroine. She's 54 years old. She's been married for 35 years. She's had 9 children. Only 6 of them are still living when the novel opens. That's not a spoiler. And ultimately, I realized I could not have written this novel as that young girl in that doctor's office, barely 30 years old with little kids. I had to grow up. They had to grow up. We all had to face some life together in order for me to really find the character of Martha Ballard and put her on the page.
Mhm.
Love it.
That's really interesting. Well, you talked about having your teeth on our jugular, and your Frozen River has been described as being both violent and tender. Can you unpack that for us?
Yes, I've been saying the entire time that I wrote it that it was the most violent thing that I have ever written. There's a lot of bad stuff that happens in this novel. People are not good to one another quite often in this book, but it's also so tender. We're looking at a really long, happy marriage. We're looking at a woman who has decades of motherhood under her belt. We're looking at a woman who is a midwife, who is there in the most primal, vulnerable moments of a woman's life. And I really wanted to contrast those two things. This terrible murder. There's a rape trial that is also at the heart of this book. It's a murder mystery, but it's a rape trial, and it says two things. And felt as though I needed to look at that in an unflinching way. It's horrible. So many women have experienced various levels of that trauma, but I also didn't want it to be, I didn't want it to feel, oh, what's the word? I run out of words after all these months of talking.
Mm.
I didn't want it to feel exploitative. So I wanted to be honest and yet handle it in such a way that sensitive readers could also feel comfortable within the pages of this book. And that was a hard balance to strike, but I think it worked in the end.
I think you did a beautiful job. I'm a really sensitive reader. And when I would tell people about this book, it was so nice to be like, don't worry, no, there's not a baby, like there's
Yeah.
not a mother that dies. Like it's gonna be gritty, but you can get through it.
Well, and sexual assault is kind of at the heart of the book, but it's not ever on the page. It's not rendered on the page. I didn't want to make you read that. I bring you into this story afterward, months after it has happened. And so it is kind of the aftermath story of what that looks like in this small community.
It's very true.
One of the things I loved about this book as a middle-aged reader is that Martha is a middle-aged woman, and it's a seasoned woman. She's, like you said, she has seen things, and she has a long and happy marriage. I think there's so many times where that's not represented on the page. You read about unhappy marriages or people looking for marriages or after marriage. So I really that was one of my very favorite things about the book. She seemed very relatable, even though she was, 300 years ago living. But was this an important thing for you, or I wonder if we're going to start seeing more seasoned protagonists. I feel like there's a lot of us readers out there who want to see ourselves on the pages. So can you kind of speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I felt really strongly about three things in particular. Number one, that we do need more mature women on the page, middle-aged women. I'm 45, I'll be 46 this summer, and I can count on one hand the number of novels, or at least series, that I've read where a woman my age or thereabouts takes center stage. And I got to thinking that this is kind of a tragedy. Why wouldn't we want to see ourselves reflected on the page? Why shouldn't mature women get to solve the murder or be the hero or be madly in love? Like, this is a massive demographic, and it's a massive reading demographic. And I don't know, I felt like that would really resonate with readers, and it has. That's the thing I heard most while I was on tour over the last 2 months, is readers coming up and saying, thank you that I got to see a mature woman take the lead in a story. The second thing is, I really feel strongly that we need more happy marriages in fiction. I understand why we don't get them. As a writer, it's easier to write a bad marriage. It is, because all of your conflict and your tension is inherent in that relationship. But if you're writing a happy marriage, you have to have so much of that coming from outside in other places in the story, and it's harder to write. But I think we need to see it. I think we need to see that it is possible. And I think readers really want it. And again, same as with the mature heroine, they've responded to that incredibly well. And then the last thing is, listen, I love a good love story. I love a romance novel as much as anyone else, but they are lying to us in a number of ways. But the biggest way that I feel like romance novels lie to us is they tell us that the marriage is the finish line. And if you've been married for longer than 5 minutes, you know that the wedding is actually the starting line for a very, very long journey that two people take together. And I wanted to write a story where you look at that and you go, what can life look like 35 years after you make the right decision? After you've lived life together and you've had all these children and you've seen joy and you have seen grief and you have been weathered as a couple. To me, that was really interesting. And it was something that I personally like to see. I like to read about that. I think it's why the Louise Penny novels sell so well. There's a happy marriage at the center of them. I think it's why the Outlander novels are so popular. There's a happy, long marriage at the center of them. I just don't see it often enough in print. And the fun part of my job is if I want to read something, I can just go ahead and write it. I
Mhm.
can make it exist in the world.
I love
I
it.
love that. The happy marriage between the two of them was so refreshing and so great. And I'm the same way. I'm always saying, like, for most romance books, they just I'm like, there's not the depth there. There's not the
Well,
life lived.
so young love is so sweet and it is so powerful. And I think Martha says this in the book, the world must be peopled. Like that's how
Yes.
we get new people. We need young love. I just don't know that we get a glimpse of it later as much
Mhm.
as we need to.
That's so true. I'd love to talk about the new doctor that came to town. His name escapes me right now.
Your
Um,
Benjamin Page.
yes, yes, and the tension between him and Martha, kind of his OBGYN ways and her expertise in midwifery. Do you feel like these tensions back then were a common occurrence where people would prefer one or the other, or that this new, like, doctors with new education were coming into towns where people were used to having a midwife deliver them?
Sure. And I mean, obviously, first, I have huge respect for any medical professional that can get a living baby into the world. I
Right.
used OBGYNs myself. So much respect all the way around. What I do think was really fascinating in Martha's time is it was the beginning of this conflict between midwifery and obstetrics. And the conflict began because the obstetric world, that community, looked out and they went, oh, we are missing a source of income. There's this thing that happens thousands and thousands of times a year that requires a medical professional, and we can make money from that. So the world of obstetrics began in medical schools, and at the time, women were not allowed in medical school. It was only men that were being taught this new field of obstetrics. And in Martha's case, there was a young doctor who came to town. His name was Dr. Benjamin Page. He was 24 years old. He had just graduated from Harvard. And he shows up and he believes that he knows everything that there is to know about delivering babies. And of course, because he's a doctor, everyone should defer to him. And when you read Martha's diary, you find really quickly that the results were tragic. He had a horrible mortality rate. Babies were born stillborn, they were born disfigured. He did not know what he was doing.
Mhm.
And then you have Martha, who'd spent 30 years being mentored by older women, learning how midwifery works. And it's a different science. There is a great deal of patience involved in midwifery. That might be my only critique of modern obstetrics today. There seems to be less patience involved in the delivery of babies. But many of the stories relayed in this particular book really happened. The first kind of time that Martha and Dr. Page kind of lock horns in the novel is in the delivery room. And he walks in and he delivers, I think it was 50 drops of laudanum to a laboring woman. And she is knocked unconscious for 9 hours. But Martha stayed. He runs off and leaves and he's like, oh, you're fine. You probably won't have this kid for weeks. Martha stays because she knows that she's in labor. And had she not stayed, this woman in the novel and also in real life, both this woman and her child would have died. So that is this recurring source of tension throughout the novel, Martha and Dr. Page, as this community is trying to figure out who they trust and who they want delivering their babies.
Interesting.
We're going to just put a pin in the book for just a second. I want to talk to you a little bit about the publishing world and trends. And I love hearing that you sort of have your finger on the pulse of trends in a crystal ball sort of way. So you're, right now there is sort of this, The Handmaid's Tale, sort of more of a Puritan focus in books. So the book is really hitting well. And even some of the Jazz Age worked with your book, I guess the first book, and the World War II fiction. So can you talk about that a little bit? And what in your crystal ball do you see coming down the pike for literary trends? We
Oh,
won't
that's
hold
a
you
good
to it.
question.
We're all going to go to Las Vegas and bet on it.
That's
So
right.
I have never actually chased a trend. I have always
Right.
just gone for the novel that seemed really interesting to me. But you can't really exist outside of this publishing ecosystem. And with every single novel that I have published, I have found myself within this mini trend. I don't know how I did it. There was, like I said, the jazz era. New York City was my first novel. My second was set on the Hindenburg, which technically is World War II, kind of pre-World War II. And then I went into the Russian Revolution at the same time that Gentlemen in Moscow and many others were coming out. I went back to World War II. Obviously, this one sort of steps back into post-Puritan era. We had Alice Hoffman do one. There was a novel called Hester. Chris Bojalian did one a year or two ago called Hour of the Witch. I've never done this on purpose, and yet somehow I have found myself in this. So I don't know if the next, I don't know if that's if I can detect the trend or if I'm just lucky or unlucky enough to find myself in the middle of it. I know for my next one, I'm going back to medieval times. So that might be something we see more of. I have a Western on the horizon. Could see more of that. I don't know. I promise myself that I only ever write this story that I am currently obsessed with.
Yes, and really, if when a book is published, you know, that's if you started doing one when the trend starts, you're already behind it. So you really do seem to catch it. Or maybe you're
for
the
instance,
trendsetter.
if I had a finished novel today, like ready to go, I'm sure my publisher would be super happy. It's not quite done yet, but it would be 12 to 18 months before you hold in your hands. That's the lead time. And that is only after I finish. That doesn't count the years worth of working on it. So I think in that sense, it's impossible to predict a trend. You just kind of have to find yourself in the middle of them.
Yeah. Interesting.
I dropped a photo of the cover of the book in the chat. So if anybody wants to open up that, but if you don't have your hardcover available right now, I'd love to talk about the cover because it's so striking to me. And we at Fabled, we love to delight in all of the books that are made with women with their back turned. In fact, we did a whole display on it that we just called We've Got Your Back, and we had every book with the woman with her back turned. But this, of course, is a different perspective.
Yes.
I'd love for you to talk about kind of what the journey of creating this cover.
So this is my really fun story for this one. I chose the title. I got my title, and I actually chose the cover itself. That has never happened in my entire career. It was last January, actually. My publisher had been sending potential covers, and they weren't quite right. And I was so frustrated because I would say, this is exactly what I want. And they would send it to me, and it was exactly what I had asked for. I was like, oh, you did exactly what I told you to. This is my fault. I am not communicating what I have in mind. And last January, about this time, I'd gotten sick. I had the flu. And so I was sort of stuck on the couch for one day. And there is an industry website that you can go to kind of for stock photography or cover idea inspiration. I spent the whole day, probably 8 or 9 hours scrolling pictures. And I found several that I was like, oh, that's what I have in mind. And this cover was one of them. And I sent 3 pictures to my publisher. I'm like, listen, this is what I'm thinking about. I don't know how to describe this, but I want something like this. And they saw this aerial view of the woman walking through the woods. And they're like, that is great. Let's do that one. I was like, oh my gosh.
So
I got
it's really cool too. You can't tell the time period really either from it, which is really,
I think
really
is
interesting.
helpful. There are plenty of readers that have to get dragged kicking and screaming to historical fiction, which is fine. There are plenty of genres that I'm not naturally drawn to. I had somebody tell me that they would never read a novel that didn't have electricity, which arbitrary, but sure. And so I kind of took that as a challenge, though. I thought, okay, it's my job. It's my job to make you not realize that you don't have it, to immerse you so quickly in this story that I can remove that barrier for you. And so I even threw in a whole scene with candle making just to see if anybody would catch on that there's no electricity in this whole thing.
It's really funny.
Well, speaking of that cover, we need to talk a little bit about the little sticker on the cover. And congratulations for being a Good Morning America book club pick. And I will say, I think that they have really upped their game. I'm starting, and even one of my publishers told me one of their books is going to be A Good Morning America, and that it's like rising in popularity. So congratulations on that. I
Very
have a
nice.
twofold question for you. One of
Yes.
them is, what was it like? How did you get that phone call that it was going to be a Good Morning America pick? And also, I know that you have just gone on tour, and I'm just curious, what was the most interesting question that you were asked on tour?
Good questions. Those are good questions. Um, to be honest with you, it's funny. I keep telling people I didn't think anybody was going to read this book. So when I proposed it to my publisher, they were like, "Oh, okay." And I'm like, "Listen, I know it's 200 years in the past," and I was obsessed with the idea, but I just kind of kept, I thought, not every book can be the book. Sometimes you write a book, and that's what careers do. They do this, and all I know is that I have to follow my passion, and I was passionate about it, but I thought it would be a really hard sell. 200 years in the past, no electricity, it's really cold, there's a murder, there's a rape trial. I thought I was asking a lot of the reader, and I thought, well, I'm asking a lot. No one's going to read it. So I'm just going to tell the truth. I'm going to tell the truth about everything. I will tell the truth about long marriages and having lots of children and life at that time and sexual assault and what it's like to be a woman in the world. And I will just open a vein and I will pour it onto the page, and it's going to be fine because nobody's going to read it. And then in June, one morning, this last June, I'd gotten out of the shower and my hair was soaking wet and the house was a wreck. And I had to I was checking my email for a different response. And then I saw the news that GMA had picked it. And I thought, oh my God, people are going to read it. I told too much truth. I told too much truth. And now I can't take it back. Yeah, it was a good lesson for me, though. People like the truth.
Yeah.
So I was stunned. I was absolutely stunned. And then I had to keep a secret for 6 months. I was terrified they were going to take it away from me if I blabbed. So almost nobody knew. My husband knew. My own kids didn't even know until it happened, really. I did let myself tell a couple of friends that I knew could keep the secret just so that I wouldn't explode.
Mhm.
And then I held on to it until they announced it on December 5th. And I kind of felt like I got shot out of a cannon that day and didn't really slow down until I got home last week. But the most interesting question I got asked on tour, trying to think. I'm kind of having to rewind in my head the various places that I've been.
Or maybe just an interesting story from the road, because we don't typically get people right off the road.
Yeah,
So
let me think. Okay.
fresh.
Shoot. That is not a hard question, and I am drawing a blank, but I will let my brain work on it. I promise.
Okay.
Well, I have another question if you need some time to think about it in the meantime.
Ask away, and then my brain will absolutely fix it for me while we're talking about something else.
Yes. I'd love, okay, spoilers abound here, guys. We're gonna talk about the ending.
Ooh,
The ending
yes, that is
was
one of the best questions. That was it. Okay.
okay, good. The ending is spectacular. And I actually was watching the most recent season of Fargo, and I was kind of like, this feels a little bit like the end of that, where
Just started that tonight. Like I had to pause the episode. We started the first episode. It's paused. I've got like 15 minutes left. So
I will be curious as to, as you kind of, it's just, I think it's like the chase and the worry and the loved ones. And I'm not going to spoil anything with Fargo either for you guys, but tell us how it was like to write it. What has the response been like? Especially when you're unfolding a thriller.
Yes. The thing that, okay, spoilers here. So, cover your ears or make a cup of coffee or just like walk away for a minute. So don't say I didn't warn you. There's a thing that happens at the end that I will only call the big chop. We're just going to call it the big chop. And it is justice being rendered in the only way that it can in this particular story. And originally I wrote the story. I knew I was going to end it that way. I knew how things happened in real life that were just completely unsatisfactory. And it was not okay to let a book end that way. And I thought, well, I can't change how it happened in real life, but I can give these readers a really satisfactory ending, and I can do it for every woman who deserved justice. friends of mine that deserved it and didn't get it. So the thing happens. We call it the big chop. In the very first version that I turned in, oh, I'm not sure if this is going to shock you. In the very first version, the big chop happens and then she feeds it to his dog. And see,
Now that is a Fargo episode.
it was so much. It was so like justice, poetic justice. Right. And my editor, I had two editors, the editor that acquired it and the editor that finished it. And the first editor got a big promotion elsewhere. So the first editor read it and she was like, I don't know if I can publish this. And I was like, understood. But when Larry McMurtry did something similar, they gave him a Pulitzer. So I don't see what the problem is here. And then obviously I worked on it and we kept the big chop, but kind of nuanced the ending a little bit more in a way that I think is actually better for the story. So
I kind of like knowing that that was your first draft, though.
Yeah. I mean, it was a lot. Like you kind of go, oh my God. Somebody asked me on the road, was that always your original ending? And I was like, well, I had to fight for it, but yes, it was just a little bit more aggressive. It was more aggressive in the early draft. And the gratifying thing to me, though, is I've gone on the road, I've talked to people, and it's usually 50-50. Half the people have read it, half the people haven't. The ones that have gone, oh my God, that ending. I loved that ending so much. It was so satisfying. And I don't know that I really understood the theme of the novel myself until talking to people. But it really is, what can justice look like when regular justice is not available to you? And I'm glad I stuck with it. It's aggressive, but I think it works for the story.
Yeah, definitely. I wanted to touch on, somebody had a question in the chat, which I think is really interesting. And I actually noticed when I was reading the book as well. Brenda asked, was there really as much premarital sex in this age? As I noticed myself.
Stunned, right? You learned something. I learned something every time I write a book, and I'm researching and I'm reading Martha's diary, and I was like, holy smokes. And you start doing the math. And then also this was confirmed in the biography that was written about her, the Laurel Thatcher Ulrich biography, which is amazing. I'm going to pull both books off the shelf.
We have it on on a display at Fabled with our eras. We've got different eras.
We have an eras display.
Yeah, so it's sitting right there. We've got quite a few copies at the store if anyone wants one. But it
is Midwife's Tale by Laurel Thatcher Ulrich. It's the biography about Martha Ballard. Those are all my notes that I believe in forever. And then this is the diary itself that is enormous. So if you want a copy, you probably don't want a copy of Martha's diary because it's enormous and 900 pages and will cost you about $350 and is actually pretty dry reading. So.
I have found that myself in reading my own ancestors' diary. I'm like, nobody really is interested in the weather. And yet we always write about the weather.
Well, fun fact, they were more of day books. They're not diaries as we think of them. There's not a lot of editorializing or emotion involved. It's the date, the weather, what happened, typically. But to answer the question, yes, the Puritans, turns out, not so pure. 4 in 10 first pregnancies in Martha's day were conceived out of wedlock. Wow. Probably 1 to 2 in 10 were born out of wedlock, but you had a lot of shotgun weddings and you had a lot of 9-pound premature babies. Oh my goodness. He isn't due for another 2 months, but look how big and healthy he is. And it was funny to me because human nature hasn't changed. We have this idea that our ancestors were really buttoned up and they were really proper and nobody was sneaking off to the barn. And it makes me laugh because there's only one way people ever come into the world. Biology works. And then there's only one way that they ever are born, and none of it is polite. Martha, her job was to deal with the impolite realities of human beings and birth and conception. And I think she did this remarkable job of it.
It's really good. We have two more questions in the chat. Kai, our communications manager, who also loved the book, says, I love all of the side relationships. Can you talk about the character of Sarah White and how you brought a little redemption, trust, and hope through her character?
Yes. So Sarah White is this young woman. She's mentioned at the beginning as having had a child out of wedlock, and she has refused to name the father. Part of Martha's job was to try to get the name of the father so the woman could get child support. Sarah White has refused to do so. She has an illegitimate daughter when the novel opens, and the whole town looks down upon her. She's just sort of pitied. And as the story progresses, there is what you hope will be sort of a love story between Sarah and one of Martha's sons, who is hopelessly in love with Sarah. And Sarah wants no part of it. Sarah is convinced that the young man who got her pregnant is going to come back for her, and they are going to live happily ever after, and it is going to be this fairy tale. And even Martha looks at her like, oh, you poor thing, you don't understand how this works. You were used. You will pay the price for it for the rest of your life. And then at the end of the story, there is this twist that I'm actually really, really proud of, where you realize that maybe Sarah is not the fool that you thought she was. And I do something in the story that is not at all what you want as the reader. You want it to go this way, but I take it this way, and you don't realize until you're over here that it's actually what everybody needs.
Mm-hmm.
And I am really, really proud of that. It was just one of the things that came to me in writing the story, one of those moments where you go, oh, I can fix this. I can redeem her entire situation. I can make her come out on top after she has been shamed and belittled and gossiped about. And it felt so good to do as the author.
That's so great. Jamie asked, was Dr. Page based on a real life character as well, or the character of quote unquote doctor?
Dr. Page is real. Everything
Wow.
that he did in the book is real. All of those diary entries about him messing up labors and delivery, all of it real. And Martha was left to kind of clean up the mess. The only thing that I adapted for the novel is I took various events that happened over various years and I condensed them into the time frame of this story. But yeah, he was just as despicable and pompous. Maybe despicable is wrong. I don't think he was evil. He was just pompous, and he was arrogant, and he had a lot to learn. And against his wishes, Martha becomes the one that teaches him.
Wow. Lisa asked, why did you choose to not have an ending for Cyrus?
Oh, that is a great question. Twofold. In real life, his story was sort of left open-ended, and so I felt like I was honoring real history. The other thing is I've always just kind of thought that there was a sequel to the story there, that there was more to Martha's story that I could tell should I choose to go back to it. And Cyrus's storyline, in theory, would be part of that.
Well, that's good to hear that there could be a sequel.
Well, I always like to ask authors and friends and any woman I know, what are you reading? What are you enjoying reading? And maybe what your favorite genre is. I know, or do you read other biographical fiction? But what's on your bedside table right now?
I am currently doing a slow read with a number of other people of Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel. And I knew it was going to be good, right? It cannot have won everything that it won and not be good, but I have just it's so good it melts your brain. Every sentence lands like a lead weight. Like it's profound and it's good. And I'm glad I'm doing the slow read, because if I
I
were
have to do it slowly.
if I were turning the pages, I would be so overwhelmed. Just by the scope of the story and the number of characters, but her sentences are so perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Beyond that, however, I read everything. I just love a good story. I'm trying to think. I'm careful with horror. I can do Stephen King usually. Beyond that, is a little iffy for me. I just don't want nightmares. But I tend to read everything. I love a good fantasy novel. I love historical fiction. On my shelf there, I have a ton of Deanna Rayburn and Susanna Kersley. This whole situation right here is thrillers.
Interesting.
So those are thrillers up there. That business, whatever, over there. I have historical. I mean, you can see my Diana Gabaldon collection
I was
there.
just going to ask if that was Outlander right there.
Yeah,
I was
that's
like, I
all of
know
it.
those spines.
Oh,
This shelf, this is novels that my friends have written.
Oh,
You have everything from historical to thriller to Southern fiction. I read it all. I just want a good story. Take me away. I love thrillers. I love mystery. I love mystery. I just, I want to escape and go somewhere else in a story.
The Winter Sea by Susanna Kersley is one of my lifetime favorites. I sell it constantly at Fabled.
It is my favorite of all of her novels, although The Rose Garden and Mariana are right up there with it. Ooh, oh, The Shadowy Horses. That one's so good too.
I haven't read that one, but I
No,
sell Winter Sea.
The Winter Sea and Shadowy Horses and the Firebird are all kind of connected. They live sort of within the
oh.
same world. So if you like the characters in the Winter Sea, I think you'll be pleased with the others.
I tried Firebird and it didn't grab me
Okay.
like Winter Sea. I don't know. I remember being in my kids' pickup line at school reading The Winter Sea. I mean, all those years ago, and
I still think about it. I still think about it once a week, probably.
That's
I've
awesome.
recommended it today.
I have literally bought it because of Elizabeth and had not read it yet. And now I'm like, what am I doing with my life?
Yeah.
Oh, it's so good. It's so good.
Well, I
Okay.
want to ask, when you said slow read, does that mean all of you guys are purposefully spreading out like your due dates or something? What does that
So
actually mean?
I actually have the link up here. It is, what is his name? It is a Substack. What is his name? I cannot find it, but I have the link for it, where basically slow read meaning 30 pages a week. And so you're just kind of every
Love
Sunday,
that.
but by every Sunday, you'll have read these certain 30 pages. My routine is I like to sit down on Sunday afternoon with a hot cup of coffee and I just kind of sink in and I read them all in one go so that I can hold the story. Um, I'm reading also advance copies of two friends. One is J.T. Ellison, A Very Bad Thing. And then the other is my friend Mary Beth Whalen has a novel coming out this fall. She changed the title on me. So I believe it is Every Moment After now, but don't quote me on that. Both of them are fantastic. That's
Katie
another.
Ellison is an absolute doll. I met her last year at Winter Institute and we're Instagram friends. I adore her.
She is not just a book friend, a publishing friend. She is one of my dearest, closest in real life friends.
Well, tell her I said hi.
I will do that. And her new novel is amazing. So
Awesome.
Okay.
Well, what are you working on next?
I currently am deep into a novel tentatively called The Pirate Queen. It is about a woman named Grace O'Malley, who was a female chieftain in Ireland in the 1500s. I'm not sure if she was the only female chieftain in Irish history, but certainly one of the only ones. But she was also a pirate. She was a privateer, and she was so good at it that she became a thorn in the side of the English, to the point where she ended up having to go meet with Queen Elizabeth I and have a confrontation just between the two of them to sort things out. What's fantastic about Grace is that she also believed that she was a queen and she would not curtsy to Queen Elizabeth. The fascinating thing to me is that the monks in charge of writing Irish history refused to include her because she was a woman. They wanted no part of writing a woman into Irish history. But the English hated her so badly that much of her life is recorded in the English state papers. So basically, her entire life story was written by her enemies, which I think is fascinating.
Mm.
And in September, as part of our practicing an empty nest, my husband and I went with JT, actually, and her husband, to Ireland for 12 days. And we got to tromp around and visit castles and libraries. And it was the most fun we've ever had. And Grace O'Malley was sort of our research topic for the week.
I love
Is
that.
JT going to talk about her getting murdered? That book too.
Well, as a friend of JT's, Jamie asked where should she start reading her books?
Ooh, oh, okay. Listen, all of her books are amazing. She has two separate series, kind of police procedural series. She's got a number of standalones. Start with the last book she published. It was last March, I believe. It's called It's One of Us, and it is, oh, it is so good. It is so good. So J.T. Ellison, It's One of Us. It's a thriller. You will be stunned.
But it's discussable. In fact, we ought to have her sometime as a Fabled Book Club because
We
it's
would love
I think it's very, very discussable.
And
Usually
it's,
thrillers can be hard to discuss, but this one would be, it was great.
Yes.
yeah, it's kind of based on some personal experiences that JT had. The premise basically of the book is a woman answers the door and there's a cop there. He's like, ma'am, I need to speak with your son. He's wanted in a murder. And she's like, well, you clearly have the wrong family. My husband and I don't have any children. Turns out her husband had been a sperm donor when he was in college, and he has about 27 children
Oh, word.
that she did not know about. And one of those children is wanted for a murder. And that's like the first page, and off you go.
That sounds so good. That's awesome. Well, Ariel, thank you so much. It's such an honor to talk with you. And your book was such an incredible read. And it's even better just knowing your love of truth and love of books as we got to discuss. If it's okay with you, we'd love to announce our next book.
Yeah.
I'll let Elizabeth kind of preview for us for next month.
So February's book club is Mercury by Amy Jo Burns. So we are huge Amy Jo Burns fans here. We sold Shiner. I think one year it was the top paperback book that we sold at Fabled. It's one that if you've ever been in the store, probably you have been sold or hand sold that book. But her next book, Mercury, is fantastic. It takes place mostly in the early 1990s, and just the nostalgia that I feel with these kids in high school in the 1990s was great. And I think it's going to be a really discussable book. Amy Jo really wanted to come to Fabled, but we had to do it over Zoom, but it's going to be a great discussion. She's wonderful. And we hope you join us. Have you tried that one yet? Or do you know much about?
I have not. I know very little about it, other than everyone that I know who has read it has absolutely loved it.
Yeah, it's
That's
really,
awesome.
really good.
She's so great. Well, we'd love for all of you guys to join us February 20th. I have put in the chat the registration for that Zoom, as well as a link to purchase the book from Fabled. Again, Ariel, thanks so much for joining us. I can't wait for your next book. And in the meantime, we'll just be selling this one and cheering you on.
Thank you, thank you, thank you for having me here and in the store last week.
So good seeing you. Thank you so much.
Of course, you
Thanks,
as well.
guys. We'll see you. Bye.